Good day, friends. In my last video, which was yesterday, I explained how China and Russia, two great powers, while they have differing worldviews, they are aligned on a common vision for the new world order. Today, I'll explain how that common vision has created a new global governance system with four verticals. And the two great powers are agreed on two verticals, and on the remaining two, they have dissimilar views. We need to understand that. So in this global governance system, where they are agreed, one vertical is on the political issues. Here both the great powers believe that all the countries in the world, which is 193 nations under the United Nations, they should have mutual respect. They should be treated equally, big and small nations, that they all should work under the international law of the United Nations, that there should be democratization of foreign policy, that all countries should be allowed to choose their own development paths, that there should be inclusivity. What this means is that already this new global governance system has two prominent institutions of its own, which are BRICS and SCO. In addition to that, it is not averse to also having the Bretton Woods institutions created by the Americans, which are IMF and World Bank, into its fold with the reforms. In short, this whole concept is about partnership. It is not about dominance. It is not about one country telling the others what exactly is to be done and setting the rules for them. So they are aligned on the political issues. The second vertical where they are aligned are the security issues, where I said both countries agree on the concept of indivisible security. And for this reason, in 2022, President Xi Jinping enunciated the concept of Global Security Initiative, and 2024, President Putin spoke about the Eurasian security architecture, absolutely similar to one another, based on the principle of indivisible security. Now, the third vertical where they do not have the same views is about strategic issues, where I said earlier that Russia, it believes in a multipolar polycentric world, whereas the Chinese believe in a multipolar world based on geoeconomics. And the fourth vertical is about economic issues, where I said in my last video, China benefited enormously from globalization, and hence it is a big supporter of globalization in the world, and therefore the Chinese talk about multilateralism in trade. On the other hand, Russia did not benefit from globalization, and it prefers bilateral trade. In fact, when we see between these two great powers, China and Russia, their annual trade today stands at $200 billion annually, but they do not have a free trade agreement with one another, and they are not likely to have the FTA. And the reason for that is simple, because there is a asymmetry in commodity trade. As far as Russia is concerned, its main trade or export to China is about energy. On the other hand, what the Chinese want to export to Russians is a whole range of high value added manufactured goods, something that the Russians do not want, because the Russians want to prioritize their own industrial development, and hence they do not give preference to external trade liberalization. So once we understand this new global governance system, its verticals, and that it is being backed by two great powers which bring their own strengths to the table, now let's go and consider the key assumption made by the Americans in this century. Now, as far as Americans are concerned, starting from the first Trump administration, all American leaders, they have said that, and it has been put in their key documents, that America in this century is in competition with China in the Asia Pacific, or what they call the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this assumption in my assessment is as wrong as the earlier fundamental assumption made by the Americans on China. And that assumption was that if America supports China's economic rise, then China will become prosperous, then China will become democratic, and China will become like America. That never happened. Because what the Americans overlooked was that while America is a nation state, China is a civilizational state with a civilization of 5,000 years. It has a thinking of its own. So China would never become like America. So this assumption also made now about they being in competition with China in Indo-Pacific, in my assessment, is wrong. The reality is, if there is to be a competition, then America is in competition with global South nations fully supported by the new global governance system backed by two great powers, China and Russia, which have their own strengths that they bring on the table. For example, the biggest strength of Russia is that it has the largest natural resources in the world. And the biggest strength of China is that it is the largest manufacturing nation of the world. China today manufactures 31% of manufacturing of the world happens in China. And last week there was a report of the UNDP, which is United Nations Development Program, which says, looking ahead, that in 2030, 40% of the world manufacturing will happen in China, and the share of manufacturing of America will drop to a mere 11%. So the key things where the Americans have got it wrong are two. The first is they speak about competing with China, whereas the competition actually, if it is to be called one, is with the new global governance system supported, as I said, by China and Russia. So this competition, I cannot see how the Americans can win it. And the second big issue where the assumption is wrong is that they believe that this will be limited to Asia Pacific or Indo Pacific, whereas it has already expanded to global South nations. And in global South is much more than Indo Pacific. It is about the Eurasian landmass. It is about Oceania nations, which is the Pacific Island nations. It is about Africa. It is about Latin America and Caribbeans. So this is exactly how it is, and this is how it will be played. And how this will be implemented, the next thing, let me explain that also. Now, we know that in March 2013, President Xi Jinping, once he became president of China, he made his first foreign trip, and that was to Russia, where he met with President Putin, something that I have alluded to, spoken about in my earlier video. In addition to meeting President Putin, he also gave a very important speech at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, where Xi Jinping gave out two key concepts completely underwritten or ignored by the majority of the world. I want to talk about those two key concepts. One, he spoke about new type of international relations based on geoeconomics. This is what I have explained so many times, and I have also spoken about in my last video, that as far as Chinese are concerned, they see a multipolar world. They see a world where all the 193 nations, if they are to trade, then they should have the freedom to decide with which country they want to trade, with which country they do not want to trade, and hence they should have a strategic autonomy to determine that, and then they all should be considered as poles. This is the thinking of the Chinese of the multipolar world. But the important thing that I want to talk about is the community of shared future of mankind. Very important. Because this is how the Chinese rise will spread across the world. We need to understand that. Now this has two components. The first component is what the Chinese call their national rejuvenation. That means the Chinese have to become a strong nation economically. That means the Chinese have to innovate, increase their productivity in China. And alongside, what will happen is they want to share that the economic thing or the economic innovations with the community of shared future or the global South nations. Now let us just go a little more in these details. When I talk about national rejuvenation, it again has two components. One, as I already said, it is about making China strong economically. And here what they have done is, we know that China has just finished with its 14th five-year plan, where the reports say that 80% of what they set out to accomplish, they have been able to do that. In addition to that, the Chinese for the innovation have come out with more concepts. I will just name a few concepts, won't go in the details of them because they are a subject by themselves. Things like low altitude economy, things like new quality productive forces, things like East data, West compute, which is about uniform national development within China. All these are there, and of course the world is waiting for the Chinese announcement of its 15th five-year plan, which will happen next year in 2026 February. So the whole idea of the Chinese is that we have to innovate. We have to create new industries. We have to create new, they are already a leader in green technology. Then they are neck to neck with the Americans, if I can say that, in big technology. So innovation and taking all these innovations and putting it into practical use applications is where they are concentrating, taking it to the industries of tomorrow, the new industries. So innovation, along with innovation, creating new industrial supply chains and strengthening them, then strengthening new value supply chains and strengthening the industrial capacities of these two supply chains. So this is in short what is about the Chinese rejuvenation, one part. The second part is what needs to be understood, that China is not an expansionist nation, and that we can learn a lot from the Chinese history of their various dynasties as to how the dynasties they have built and rebuilt the Great Wall of China. That is the mentality of the Chinese. But what the Chinese say belong to them or what are their core concerns, they will certainly not let them go. And the Chinese have already given out their core concerns, which are Taiwan, South China Sea, Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet. They have not set any timelines as to when they want to get Tibet and Taiwan back, but they are very much there that they will not let them go. So this is about the national rejuvenation. Now, as I said, this has to be shared now with the global South nations. I've already listed the global South, which is 80% of the world, where this will be shared through their Belt and Road Initiative. We know that today Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which was announced by Xi Jinping in 2013, 151 countries out of 193 countries of the world, they are on board the Belt and Road Initiative. And we also know that nearly for 120 countries in the world, China is the primary trading partner. Now, what the people do not know is that this Belt and Road actually is a very interesting concept on which I need to just explain a bit. Now, you see, Belt and Road has two key components. Through the Belt and Road, the Chinese are looking at how to increase their influence. They do not want to increase their sphere of influence. Let's understand these two terms, very important. When we talk about sphere of influence, we are talking about the military component as well. We are talking about what the Americans have done, whose strength is military power. The Americans have close to 800 military bases across the world because they have created spheres of influence across the world. Chinese are not looking at this at all. In fact, in reality today, China, outside China, has only one military base, that is in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. So what are the Chinese looking at is the point. So what the Chinese are looking at is that all the countries which are on board the BRI, and after BRI we know the second thing was the Digital Silk Road, and Digital Silk Road is about the cyberspace, hardware and software connectivity. Hardware pertains to the third industrial revolution technology, and software pertains to the fourth industrial revolution technologies, which is artificial intelligence. So the Chinese, because they are experts in application of AI, they want to take all these things and bring prosperity, development to the countries which are on board the Belt and Road Initiative. So when the Chinese people will go and the industries will go to majority of these BRI countries with their industries to help in their prosperity, what will happen is that those countries will be beholden to the Chinese. So they will have certain respect for the Chinese, they have deference for the Chinese. What deference means is that in return, those countries where the Chinese BRI has gone, those countries will be sensitive to Chinese core concerns, and they will dovetail Chinese core concerns in their own foreign policy, and this is what is called influence. So it is very distinct from spheres of influence. Now, how will the Chinese cater for the military component if they do not have the military bases is the second question. So for that, again, they have come up with a very interesting concept. And that concept is that the Belt and Road Initiative, a year when it was announced in 2013, in 2012, the PLA was given an additional task. And that additional task was that the PLA will be responsible to safeguard Chinese infrastructure, Chinese people and Chinese interest across the world. So that was primarily for the BRI nations. So wherever they have their infrastructure, they have their interests, they will get into the indivisible security mode with the security forces of that concerned country where the BRI has gone. So it is in that mode that they will have an idea of exactly what is going on in the region of that particular BRI country. So this is how the Chinese are working on. There are other aspects also of deterrence, but I won't go in the details. I just wanted to explain this. But in addition to that, the Belt and Road Initiative. Another thing what the Chinese have done is in 2021, Xi Jinping announced the Global Development Initiative. Now what this is about is, it is about the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goal, where the Chinese are contributing a lot. And these sustainable development goals, which were announced in 2015, are to be accomplished by 2030, and they deal with the human factor, which means it deals with things like alleviation of poverty, bringing of education. So it is these things. So it is distinctive. It is very different from the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is how the whole thing will work. Now, as far as the two institutions of the new global governance system are concerned, which is BRICS and SCO, I won't go in the details. They are subjects by themselves, but suffice to say that today the BRICS has 10 full members, and it has 10 partner countries. SCO has 10 full members, 10 partner countries, and there are a lot of countries, especially of the global south, which are queuing up to join these institutions because they promise them development, they promise them equality. As I said, they promise them all that is there in the new global governance system. Now, the last question that I want to tackle is that we are talking about this new world order. When will this stabilize? That is the question. So in my assessment for this, the answer has to be found in what the Americans are saying, that fundamentally they are in a technology competition with China. So everything really is about technology. Now in technology, we know the first and the second revolution, industrial revolution, they happened in West. The third industrial revolution happened in America. And as far as the fourth industrial revolution is concerned, in the entire AI stack, the two countries, the big powers, great powers, China and Russia, they are neck to neck. In fact, the Chinese are ahead of the Americans in things like talent, in things like applications of AI, in things like integration of AI. They are way ahead. So in my thinking, what is happening is that first of all, the internet is getting split, what is called the splinternet, and the reason for that is that there is the Americans do not trust the cyber security of anything which has Chinese in it. They are skeptical of that, and Indians which are on board, which see themselves aligned with the Americans, they have chosen the American system here. So there is a splinternet, and along with the splinternet, what is happening is that these technologies that I spoke about, the fourth industrial revolution, they will be going to various countries, and as far as the majority of global south countries are concerned, they are likely to choose the technology, the Chinese technology, because they are already on board the BRI. So what the world is looking at is really a splinternet and two sets of technologies, one led by America and the other led by China with their own standards for interoperability. For example, as I said, India has chosen the American standard. Recently, India announced the AI hub in Andhra Pradesh with help to be made by Google, where the Google will also lay the submarine cables. So the point is that once the majority of countries, the applications have already gone to the countries, that is when the tech competition, then it ceases to exist. Things are crystallized, and that is when, in my assessment, perhaps in 10 years time, the world will stabilize. And why I say it will stabilize in 10 years time, here is the reason for that, key reason. You see, in 2017, the Chinese announced a new AI development plan where they said that this will be accomplished by 2030, this plan. And Eric Schmidt, who is a well-known American technology man and a former CEO of Google, he has interpreted this plan to say that by 2030, when this plan will be done, China will dominate AI industries of the world. So Chinese are very good in applications of AI and integration of AI, and therefore once that happens, if not in 2030, by 2035, the new world order, which in my assessment will be really the global south nation as the key, the 80% of the world. So it will all stabilize. Thank you very much.